On August 26, 1920, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution of America was ratified, saying, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." Later that year, women would be given the chance to vote for their next president for the first time in American history. That sentence may not have a big emotional impact on us today, having exercised this right for nearly 100 years, but this was a right women had fought valiantly for over a century. There were feminist figures in the 18th century, Abigail Adams being one of the most widely known, but the fight for women's suffrage really started picking up speed in the 1820s, when voting rights were given to all white males, as opposed to just white males with a certain amount of property or wealth. This extension of rights triggered many less privileged groups to fight for their own suffrage. This included racial minorities and women. At this point in history, women were suffering from a social construct known as the cult of true womanhood. This idea praised the image of a quiet girl getting married and bearing children while spending her days at home, cleaning, cooking, and raising her children. Women were said to be educated only to make them good teachers of their sons, who would make up the next generation of the government, but not to take positions of power themselves.
The cult of true womanhood is a kind of dual-edged sword for women and for suffragists. It argues that women, because they are, under the terms of the cult of true womanhood, more moral than men, they should, all the more reason they should be able to vote and help bring that morality to politics. The other side of that argument, though, is that it also suggests that women wouldn't, that by women being brought into the sort of dirty world of politics, that their morality, that their purity would somehow be challenged, sullied by the world around them.
Women fought against these expectations, and by the 1850s, activist groups and protests had made a lot of progress. However, it wouldn't be long before the Civil War started in 1861, and the citizens of America shifted their attention to battle. This was disheartening for the women that had just started to feel confident in their ability to eventually win the war for suffrage, but they were far from ready to give up. As their husbands went to fight for their side of the Civil War, women took up jobs traditionally tagged for men to keep the communities running.
The Civil War helped the argument for women's suffrage in the sense that women throughout the war, time and time again, were able to show that they could contribute to society in meaningful ways, in ways that they hadn't been allowed to contribute before.
It will come as no shock to hear that they were more than sufficient in these positions, and people noticed. It became less of an oddity to see women breaking the stereotypes, so when the Civil War ended in 1865, they had even more of a reason to fight for equality. Over the next 50 years, women refused to let people think that the war for suffrage was just a trend. Two organizations emerged, the National Woman Suffrage Association and the American Woman Suffrage Association, and in 1890 the two united as one, forming the National American Woman Suffrage Association. The group put their heads together and realized this was more than telling America that women deserved equal rights. It was about getting inside their heads and making them realize it. They appealed to supporters of the time's strong gender roles by saying that a woman's vote could give a more maternal perspective on political issues. They appealed to white supremacists by saying that giving white women the right to vote would further secure their position of social dominance, a controversial technique that would come into question later in history. Women were smart about how they fought for their rights, and in the late 19th century to early 20th century, generations of hard work began to pay off. Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Idaho, in that order, gave women the right to vote in the 1890s. These were the more progressive states of the time, and it took about another decade for other states to catch on. Finally, in the second decade of the 1900s, Washington, California, Arizona, Kansas, Oregon, Montana, Nevada, New York, Michigan, Oklahoma, and South Dakota, in that order, began to pass state laws permitting women's suffrage. You might notice that the vast majority of these states are the later established ones outside of New England, and this is because the citizens of the New England states tended to be more stuck in their ways and resistant to change.
Millions of women voted before the amendment. The amendment is the result of women's existing political power. Millions of women were enfranchised by the 19th Amendment. I mean, it didn't look like there was any hope that Massachusetts was going to enfranchise women beyond school board elections. They had to be pushed by the federal amendment.
Finally, in 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, granting full voting rights to women in every American state. Although you now know how women obtained the right to vote, it is tenfold more important to understand what this meant to women's rights overall. Giving women a vote meant giving them a voice through which to tell America about the unheard problems that women had been facing for centuries, but had been forced to keep to themselves for fear of retaliation.
During the assault, my right shoulder was dislocated, my left femur was fractured, damage was done to my spine, and I didn't find out for almost a year and a half that I had received a traumatic brain injury. When I reported this to my command to try to get help, I was pulled into my commander's office with my commander and my superintendent, who is also our acting first sergeant, and told that sometimes it's better to just embrace the suck.
Capital access is a chronic barrier for women business owners. Our team has heard countless stories of the bias against women when they attempt to obtain business finance.
It became more common to see women getting a chance to speak to large groups of people, and as technology boomed and radios and televisions were invented, those large crowds became all of America. So yeah, the 19th Amendment was pretty important. It was one of the first and most significant battles in the war for gender equality. The war is not over, but these pioneers of women's rights continue to inspire women fighting similar battles in modern times. So, let's tip our hats to those who came before us, go out, and stand against the injustices of the world today.